I'd like to call this May 28th meeting of the Albany Traffic and Safety Commission meeting to order. Could we start with the roll call?
Commissioner Javindal?
Present.
Commissioner Jordan?
Here.
Commissioner McCroskey?
In front of you.
Commissioner Paulson?
Here.
And Chair Del Rosario?
Present. Okay, item 2 is approval of the minutes. The draft minutes are there.
I'll move approval of the minutes. I'll second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none. On to item 3. This is for public comment for items that are not on the agenda. So if anyone has any public comment to make in general.
We have
Please
one
come on up.
speaker
Oh,
card.
thank you.
Doug Donaldson.
And I have another one up here from Ken.
Good evening. Doug Donaldson, here, Albany resident. Gosh, I'd never been to a Traffic and Safety Commission meeting until the last one, and now I'm here twice. I promise you I won't be back unless it's important. And this is important, okay. So, I was driving up Solano after dark last week, approaching Safeway, I think that near Curtis, and suddenly, off to my side, in the crosswalk was a person, 25 feet away. I couldn't stop. And the woman, there's a woman, she goes, ah, she was, frightened. I was frightened. She was probably angry, swearing at me, I suppose. But the thing is, she was wearing all black. In December, I was walking here to a P&Z meeting, walking by Little Star, and a guy comes out with his takeout pizza, jaywalks across Solano, and suddenly, bam, no one didn't hit, but suddenly he starts swearing at him like mad, and there's this car coming up Solano and almost hit him. He was wearing all black. So it's not good. And my wife reminded me that, remember years ago, maybe the 50s, the 60s, they had the Wear White at Night campaigns? I don't know if any of you do. I did remember that. I'd forgotten about it, but she reminded me of that. And it's time for some public education in order, I think. When I went out to buy a new raincoat this winter, I wanted Gore-Tex, I wanted a good one. I went down there. The only thing in my size was black. The rain pants are black. When I wear that thing, I am stealthed. And I need to have a flashlight with me, or I need, put one of my biking jackets on over it so I can be seen. We have a problem right now, and it's black is in fashion. Look at people around here. Look, there's 3 people in the audience wearing black. You can't be seen at night. And I think that it's a simple thing, but a public relations campaign would be in order. Items in the city newsletter, some public education about beware. If you're wearing black, you can't be seen, or wear white, or wear bicycle garb, or whatever, reflective tape. Carry your flashlights. I honestly did not see that woman in the crosswalk until it was too late. And she had to, I don't know if she had to jump back or not, but she sure was upset about it. So, that's my comment.
Thank you. And I have a card here for Ken McCroskey.
Speaking for myself and not as a member of the commission, since Amy Smollins is not here, I'm contractually obligated to remind you that Albany Strollers and Rollers sells reflective leg bands. Some of us use them on our arms when walking on Solano Avenue. I highly recommend them. On a sadder note, there was a death in the last couple of weeks in Albany on the streets. A woman was killed on a Monday at about 1 in the afternoon at the intersection of Jackson and Solano. Drugs and alcohol were not indicated. I don't remember the weather that day. As I've upgraded my family cars, I've noticed that the sidebars are more slopey and thicker, and they have airbags in them. I actually have to move my neck to see if somebody is coming into the crosswalk at a four-way stop. That's a detail, but overall, as somebody who's interested in traffic safety, I would remind the commission that it's no good when anybody dies. And we should keep track of that and keep that in mind. And perhaps Chair, we could close this evening with that pedestrian who I don't have the name of in mind.
That would be great.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to item 4, presentations. Unless there's other public comment, is there any other members of the public that wish to speak on items not on the agenda? I know a few people just walked in.
I put down the agenda item 5.2 for the pavement management.
Okay, then we can wait for you then.
I'm actually here for Cleveland Avenue, Cleveland Trail.
Sounds good. So we'll have you come up and speak in that item. Okay, so moving on to item 4.1, under the presentations, monthly police data and collisions and citations report.
Thank you, Chair. Pedestrian collisions reported in February totaled 4. Bike collisions, 0. 13 vehicle collisions, 6 of which were reported as injury collisions. Moving citations issued were 13 in February, and 4 DUI arrests were made. As was mentioned by Commissioner McCroskey, there was a fatality earlier in the month, and when the police investigation is complete, we'll bring the detailed information to the Commission.
Okay. Any questions?
I think it's just remarkable that the collisions with people biking has gone to 0 for so long, and the pedestrian collisions are climbing. I mean, it seems pretty significant trend at this point. As far as the moving citations, looks like there's been a 90% decrease in 4 years. Is there any insight into why that is?
Former Police Chief McQuiston made a presentation to the commission probably maybe a year or so ago, and he talked a little bit about that, and I think it's trends in policing. That what he reported is there may be more and more situations where officers are pulling people over. He doesn't have statistics on this, but officers may pull someone over and warn them rather than to write them a citation. That just kind of channeling. I can find that particular meeting and send you an email to that link if you wanted to see more details about it. But definitely policing is changing. There also have been, we're continue to be short on the number of police officers. We have trouble recruiting and retaining police officers in Albany. So they're busier. The officers that are on duty are busier as well. And then at that time, there was he didn't have statistics, but he speculated there might be a decline in funding for the special enforcement programs for things like DOI and traffic enforcement.
I mean, I think it's interesting that the collision data is initially indicate that the 90% reduction in citations was of any consequence. I mean, the number of motorist collisions has remained pretty much the same. Injury collisions remain the same, and you've got one trend going down and one going up. So it reminds me of when Marin Avenue was reconfigured, and the police department ahead of that, as part of an enforcement effort, doubled their citation rate, which was already, towards what was 4 years ago, and did a before and after speed survey and saw, I think, 0.1 mile per hour difference. And so part of what motivated that project was the police chief coming to this body and saying, if you want to slow people down, you need to reconfigure the street. We're not going to be able to do it with enforcement. So anyway.
Any other questions? Comments? Okay. Moving on to 4-2, shared mobility data.
gig reported large increases in the month of February, getting back towards the peak in the fall in terms of both members and trips. Other than that, they continue to see 6 to 9 cars generally coming in and out of Albany, or sort of the average rate of number of vehicles in Albany at a given time. And the Lime bike numbers continue to decline, and the scooter numbers with a scooter here or there coming in through Albany continues to see some number of rides in the city, even though they don't have deployment here.
Questions?
Are these at all subsidized?
Oh, actually, if you can fill out a comment card, then we'll have to have you come up to provide public comment. Sorry, we're being recorded, so it's good to get everything on record.
Can they come up and fill out the comment card afterwards?
Yeah, you can come up and speak, and then you can fill a card afterward.
I was just curious if these are subsidized at all by the city? The gig and the scooters and
Yeah, I believe the answer is no, but the city can.
That's correct. It is not.
I had a question. Do we have a timeline yet for when the scooters are going to officially show up in the city?
No, they still have not provided any timeline. I haven't got an update on launch in Berkeley. They may wait till they are launching next door at this point. We still haven't gotten a schedule that would happen in advance of that.
And have the bikes officially are no longer in Albany? I don't see any. I don't think anymore.
There continue to be bikes, but they continue to decline as they don't
Yeah.
replace them or really spend a lot of
Yeah.
resources to fix them, I guess, if they get damaged.
Interesting. Sorry, one more question. Has there been any discussion about e-bikes in Albany from Lime or any other company?
We did discuss with Lime an interest in e-bikes, that we wouldn't have any issue with those deploying there. And El Cerrito is also, as they requested, scooters in El Cerrito. El Cerrito said, can we start with electric bikes? But haven't heard that they're planning to deploy those in either location at this point.
Thanks. Any other comments on 4-2, shared mobility? Do we have a public comment, or is that another item? Okay. Okay, moving on to the discussion items. 5-1, proposed speed hump locations for 900 block of Peralta Avenue.
Thank you. This item is being brought back from discussion a little while ago at this point, where the commission already approved speed humps as a traffic calming treatment for this block, and was left to staff to bring back the exact locations for review by the commission. The discussion previously at Traffic and Safety left open whether 1 or 2 speed humps should be installed. Staff is recommending both locations. The main issue that was expressed was speeding as you get towards the Marin intersection, so 1 speed hump towards that southern end of the block could address that, but if we monitored after and then wanted to install a second one, it's easier to deliver it as we're already doing work in that block. And there was, I think, a little bit lower speeds going southbound, but it wasn't, I don't think, a dramatic difference between the northbound and southbound during that discussion. The location recommendation is for essentially the 2 humps to be 100 feet south and north of the intersections. That's generally the closest you want to get them to the intersection. And this is more or less the shortest distance of block that you would want 2 treatments. You want about 250 feet between them, so they fit here. A smaller block, you would probably just want 1 speed hump. Have some pictures of the location, but so this is facing towards Marin. The speed hump would be about where that blue car is on the approach. This is facing south, and then this is facing north. And then the location on the north end of the block would be where the red car is. Luckily, very colorful cars were parked in the right locations. And then this is looking south. Happy to answer any questions on that.
Okay, questions from the commission?
I don't have questions on the speed humps, but I did note in the staff report there was discussion of striping at the corner,
Yeah.
northeast corner, and bollards or stanchions, flexible stanchions. So I was curious if that is going to be pursued still or what the status is.
That was already discussed and approved at the commission. This was one piece that was left to come back, but that is still part of the treatment plan.
Okay. And would that be sort of simultaneous, or could it go ahead of the other one? Because, yeah, the speed humps are 15,000 or something, right?
So actually, this is an opportune time to have this come to council. We're just doing our paving and ATP striping project, and that this block gets some treatment. So we had already planned to do the striping piece, and we're talking to the contractor to change order the speed humps into it. So
Oh, great.
the execution side is okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes?
Just a general question about what is the process for generally getting a speed hump on your street? Like, do a certain number of residents need to be in support of it? I'm just wondering generally.
Yes, we have a petition process where the request is made, and it's on the requester to secure signatures from residents of the block. We advise them of the potential noise and vibration implications. We do a traffic survey to study the speeds on that block and to see whether it's merited. We have a policy that gives guidance on what speeds and what volumes merit different treatments. And that gets brought to traffic and safety discussion.
And then a question on the design of the speed humps. Is that, I can't recall if that's in the city standards or not. And part of the reason I ask is the speed humps that were installed as a part of the North Albany traffic calming project, that was under the prior public works regime, I'll call it. And so I have quite a more confidence in the current regime that this won't happen, but many of them were way too short. I mean, just so short. And I didn't really realize how widespread it was. I knew the one near me was short, and I made a comment, and they came back and rebuilt the whole thing. I talked to a neighbor on Cornell years later, and he said, oh, yeah, ours doesn't do anything. And I was like, oh, I guess this is a system-wide problem. So I don't know if there's a standard and what the quality control is.
So there's two pieces to this. We do have a standard. We have a standard that was developed by Parisi that then we adjust for a specific location. But in terms of height and slopes and things of that sort, that's pretty consistent. I think the issue you're talking about is more of a construction control issue, and hopefully we're doing better than we had in the past.
Another question. So the standard, I presume the standard isn't for what's called parabolic speed humps, if you know what that is. So they've got basically an abrupt discontinuity at each edge, whereas I've heard some preference, that parabolic speed humps work well in other parts of the world. I don't know, Commissioner Jovendell might have some experience or knowledge about that. I guess they're harder and more expensive to construct, but you don't get the sort of massive banging of parts of cars on the ground and whatnot and damage to the pavement.
I'm not that close to the specific details of the speed hump design, but I know we have a design. I can look into different types.
And I would just add the most recent installation was on Masonic. That was a crosswalk, but that is to the most recent speed hump detail. So there's a version of that doesn't have the flat part in the middle for the crosswalk. That would be what the current design is.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because I noticed driving over the two, I always thought that was because of the speed table that it seemed so much less abrupt, but you're actually saying it has got the parabolic approach, and decline. Wow, interesting, okay. Well, I would, well, I don't know. I'm interested in that becoming the standard. I don't know that experimenting on Peralta is necessarily the place to do it, and I don't know how much of an experiment it is. I mean, they're common worldwide.
Oh, yeah. All right. If you'd like, I can answer a little bit about that now. Parabolic speed humps are pretty much the norm. Speed tables, sometimes you see them done parabolic on the ramps and flat on the top. Other times you see them done almost trapezoidal where the ramps are just flat. Berkeley has gone to a standard that is a variant of those that applies on a speed table. We don't do speed humps at all, but what we call a sinusoidal ramp.
Right, yeah, okay.
So the ramp starts out flat and then ramps up and then smooths out to the top.
That's actually what I was thinking. It was sinusoidal.
Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I used the wrong
Which
term.
you can kind of do with a speed hump as well, but without the flat section on top, it's a
Right.
little less meaningful to do it that way. The point being, again, that we pretty much don't do like circular sections. Parabolic still smooths out fairly well at the ends, but especially the temporary like rubber speed humps that have been used at times, those have to have some kind of lip. You can't feather out the edge to nothing. So that's where it becomes a little bit of a challenge. So the construction technique that would allow you to provide a smooth edge so that, say, someone with back injury driving over it at a reasonable speed isn't going to get that jarring effect. You need to grind down into the asphalt before you place the speed hump so that the thickness is actually embedded into the existing pavement section rather than trying to sit on top of it. Because if you just put the asphalt in and feather it down to nothing, the edge will ravel and fall apart, and we don't want that, of course. So if there's any questions, feel free to contact me about it.
I might have someone reach out to you and.
I'll leave it at that, but yeah, I got lots of details on this stuff.
Yeah, I think it was actually sinusoidal is what I was thinking of when I was saying parabolic.
Yeah.
It doesn't have that abrupt transition.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine the pavement on the downstream side survives better too, because the impact, I mean, you can just see with the parabolic, the impact of the vehicle. You get a big oil stain there, the pavement starts to go away or get degraded.
Yeah, the speed control is all supposed to come from the vehicle rocking as they go over it if they go too fast, not about jarring when they hit the edge of it. So yeah, those are important things. But as Mark said, a lot of it's about control during construction to make sure that it's built per specification. You can have great specifications, but if you're not adhering to them, you get bad results.
Right. But I mean, the sinusoidal is a whole different profile. So
yeah,
I guess that's the one I'd be interested in Albany looking into.
Yeah, if you're thinking about something that's more ADA friendly, a sinusoidal profile does a good job of that, and we can certainly share Berkeley's standard for that.
Well, like I say, I think the pavement, I think it's better for the pavement too. It's more expensive to build, but I think the downstream, what I see these speed humps, they just get hammered on the downstream side. I see that on Milvia, basically everywhere there is one of these things that's parabolic. So I would encourage the city to look into that.
Okay. I'm glad that trigonometry came back in for me. Pretty cool. I never thought I would. Any other questions?
So that's sinusoidal, not sinusoidal.
Not sinus.
It was sinusoidal. The residents who complained could just take Claritin and then.
Nothing with the nose. Sorry. Let's open up to public comment. Justin, you want to call it out?
We have one speaker card, Brian Parsley.
Good evening, Commissioners. Brian Parsley, Albany resident, 900 block of Peralta. I'm excited to see this is finally back after 16 months. I think the 2 speed humps are a great idea. That's what we've been asking for since the beginning. I know one of the reasons that our street didn't technically meet the standard for speed. However, it was the sheer number of cars, over 2,000 a day, that traveled up and down that stretch, a very small stretch of Peralta. My concern is, at the time in November of 2017, the then staff member for this commission told the commissioners that the street treatments, which were one of the keys to this project because of the turn radius, and it's not the northeast corner, it's the southeast corner. It's the corner of Marin and Peralta that is the issue, not northeast would be Solano and Peralta. So it's the southeast corner and to a lesser extent the southwest corner. The angles of those that intersection is very extreme. So cars whip around the corner, or vice versa, they whip around onto Marin. And at that point, the street treatments, as it was told to the commission and the residents at that time, could occur very quickly. And while I understand that there's been a staffing change and that staff member probably shouldn't have made those promises were made. And my concern is that we get a timeline. We understand that we will be more than happy to wait for speed bumps. We understand there's a queue, but the street treatments, as it was posed to us at that meeting, could occur very quickly, as it was painting and bollards. So, and we still don't have a firm timeline on when that would occur. So, I know there's a change order in the CIP, but it would be nice to know if we could get a timeline rather than, not in the near future, but a timeline on when these street treatments could begin. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more public comment.
Barbara Martello.
Hello, I'm Barbara Martello. I'm the captain of the Peralta Block Speed Bump community. I want to thank you for approving it. I'm a mother of one of the 8 young children on the block, so we're all, as Brian said, really eager to know when. There's a lot of holy expletive, please don't kill my child, being screamed on our street, and it's just, it can be really intense sometimes. So I don't know if that is something that can be made available for us to plan, because we've been waiting for a couple of years, and we all totally understand that, stuff takes time, but a timeline makes everybody knit at least at a pace that they can handle in their elbows and upper back. So if that could be addressed, that would be great. And congratulations on your new baby, Justin. It's nice to see you in person with eyeballs.
Yeah, if staff can respond before we bring it back to the commission, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we're just ramping up our paving contractor right now, and we are working his schedule with a number of other contractors in the area. So when we get some firm information, we'll get it out. But we're talking months in terms of the project. Once they get going, it'll go quickly. We're just trying to mesh it in with all the other things going on in the city. But we'll push that information out.
So perhaps this calendar year?
Within a few months.
Oh, great.
Yeah, the overall project is very quick. I think we have less than 90 days to execute the entire project. So once we can find a window that fits in with all the other things going on, and if it stops raining, we can get the work going.
If I could just add, with respect to the overall problem, Mark and I have spent a lot of time talking about the challenges we've had in the past of having kind of piecemeal approvals of requests, which is fine, but we can't execute them on a piecemeal basis. And so we're thinking about different ways of organizing and packaging traffic calming improvements so that the decision-making process leads to execution soon after, which historically we haven't had, and why sometimes the answer that you may have heard people hear is, yeah, it's pretty easy to do a speed hump, but it's hard to do them one at a time.
Also on that point, I think one of the issues they had in the past was there was no dedicated funding source, and as part of the latest update to the CIP, we have an annual project set up to address some of these these requests. We do have a backlog because we've made this commitment to other places. So, I think we have to buy down our backlog, but then we'll have some consistent funding to execute on a more reasonable timeframe.
And the bollards and striping will be part of this same contract?
Yes.
And I think just to clarify from the comment in the audience, or from the public, it is the northeastern corner of the intersection. I guess you're thinking about it as the block between Marin and Solano, but it is the northeastern corner of the intersection of Peralta and Marin. Northeast, isn't it? It's the hillside? Yeah. It's the hillside.
So in other words, coming westbound on Marin, you turn right onto Peralta. That's the corner you're going around.
Correct.
Well, and also people come down Peralta and turn right on Marin at White.
Right, so that's the northwest corner.
Right. And I think
That
that's what we approved at the last
Correct.
time this came to the commission.
Yeah, so this is,
The northwest or the northeast?
No.
Both. Okay, both. Even better.
Yeah.
Okay.
exactly what the residents have described.
Okay.
Just using terminology reference to the intersection, not to the block.
Block, correct. Okay, bring it back to the commission for comments.
I'm happy to make a motion. I don't
be
see that
great.
there's much to debate here.
That would be great.
I move that we approve the staff recommendation for location of 2 speed humps on the 900 block of Peralta, one to be placed in front of 906 Peralta Avenue and the other in front of 917 Peralta Avenue.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Seeing none, it passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, item 5-2, Albany Pavement Management Program and Capital Improvement Project Planning.
Thank you.
So unfortunately, if you saw the note, we're cutting this presentation a little short, actually a lot short. We had hoped to have a more sort of robust discussion about the results of the street saver analysis. And since the last meeting, we worked to change the functional classes and do some of the structural changes. And then we started doing our runs. We got some what looked like good preliminary results. But then Monday, when we started digging in a little deeper, it really wasn't making the sense that we wanted it to make. And rather than trying to come up here and we press print and here it is, I decided to pull it and we'll come back with a more complete set of analysis that we can discuss. But I do have a couple of slides sort of outlining what we changed in the system and show you where it's sort of an updated ending point from the last presentation. So we made some adjustments to the Street Saver program, and we reclassified the streets matching the general plan and the ATP, so we should be on track in terms of the right functional classifications of all the streets. And then we were able to pull out what we call the residential bike routes. So these are streets that have been identified as bike routes that are not either collectors or arterials. So these we want to handle differently, and we were able to put them in this other classification within Street Saver, which will allow us to tweak the weighting as well as the treatments to see what we can come up with that makes sense. So we have that set up. This is where we ran into trouble. We started running it, and something in these changes made Street Saver push everything to one functional class. So one functional class was getting everything and really nothing else to the other functional classes, and that just didn't seem right. And so that's what we're going to come back and work through with you guys at the next meeting. So here's some of the updated information. If you recall from the last meeting, we had these bike routes, residential bike routes, classified as collectors. And if you recall, I believe the centerline miles of the collectors roughly equaled the residential. So there was just a huge number of collector streets and sort of out of whack with what you might expect from our network. This looks a little more consistent with what we I think we were expecting. Some of the things that changed, a number of the collectors in the Caltrans maps, arterials and collectors were actually residentials. I think Pomona was one that we were just baffled on. I don't know why that was a collector. So things dropped from the collector into the residential, and then the bike route residentials are their own classification. And so we have the centerline miles and the current weighted PCI for each of the classifications. And just to note that this data is a little stale. It's based on a 2015 PTAP survey. We have another survey lined out that we're going to do this summer, so this will get refreshed. So these numbers, will change, and we have done projects. So some will go up, some will go down, but this is a good representation of where we are right now. Here's that graphically. You can see the different classifications graphically, and it matches with the it matches with the general plan and the bike plan. And I'm sure if we miss something, you'll let us know. And then here's the PCI gradation table, and I think we lost something in our slides. We had a little point there. Right now, the overall network is around 53. Actually, all the classifications are in 53. I think bikes are 51, and arterials or collectors are 57.
Could it be a build? If you push forward, it might show up. Push forward.
Oh, there it goes.
It's on the printouts.
We're
PowerPoint.
We're fancier than I thought we were. So we're all in here, and as we started talking about the runs and where we want to be, our thought was we're going to run runs. We're going to be focused on what does our current budget get, our current 5-year budget, and project out over a 10. So we have a 5-year budget, and then where we would be at the end of a 10-year horizon, assuming that same level of annual spending. And then we thought, what would it take to get to sort of an overall network of up to 85? Just to kind of give a bound of, this is what we're programmed to do, 85, hey, if we're at 85, that would be great, but what would that cost? So we'd get a sense of that. And then look at options that get us into the good range, 70 to 75, and try to keep it at that range at a consistent level. And then have also each of the functional classes be roughly the same, at around the same PCI. So one of the things we were getting right now, if you do it one way, one functional class is at 85 and everything's down at 50. That didn't make any sense. So we want to make sure that spread's not too far apart, but then just show where we would be with different options. And let's see, this is a figure showing our PCI current, and you could see the areas of concern that we have are areas down here that have a concentration of real poor streets that we need to deal with. We are dealing with, this is Washington, this is under design right now. But then we also have a fairly good amount of our network in the very good and good. So we want to make sure we're also spending sufficient money to keep those streets in good condition. So it's this balancing act. And I think one of the issues we're going to be running into is, okay, we're doing what we can to keep the good streets good, but how are we going to tackle the streets in the poor condition, particularly ones that don't rate high enough because their classification, their weighting, and the poor state of the pavement. The street saver is going to say you don't spend money on those streets, but that doesn't work from a policy perspective, so we need to talk about how we want to address those, whether it's either allocating a percentage of the budget towards that or some approach to do that. So that's where we're at.
Questions from the commission?
You mentioned using the 2015 PTAP. I think it was 2013 when I first became aware of Street Saver and engaged. But I just want to do a reality check because the PCIs that came out of that didn't make any sense even to a layperson. And we pushed that to Public Works at that time, and they ended up re-rating about half the center line miles of streets by a whole category, which was pretty alarming. That was sort of the beginning of my feeling that it's underfunded. So I'm still curious about that aspect of the program. But I want to make sure that the data that is used from 2015, it's not the data that I'm remembering, or if it is, it's the city Public Works generated data, not the consultant generated data.
So we've had, so there's a couple answers to this.
Okay.
There's part of our issue with the Street Saver that we've been having is we've been trying to correct a lot of things in the database. And as we find them, it sets us back a little bit, and then we come up and there's anomalies. I think one of our anomalies we're having right now is the way we set up our street segments. So you'll have residential streets block by block by block, but then you'll have Marin, one big thing. So you look at the size of a project of Marin or Cleveland is expensive. It exceeds our annual budget in any way, shape, or form. So it never gets selected. So we need to deal with that either by forcing a project at a certain time or changing the way the segments are done to be more realistic relative to our budget. So we're trying to correct some of those. We are using the 2015 data, and so I think there's two things on this. This is a starting point. We use this data in two ways. One, to project our overall needs in sort of a budget scenario. And so that means slight variations in PCI really don't make a difference because I don't think that will change the overall spend amount that we need to do over a 10-year period. When we do a project in a specific year or a number of years, before we set that project, we'll go out and confirm that, yeah, these are the streets we want to do, and yes, they have the PCIs that the Street Saver is saying they are. And I think that's one of the things that maybe wasn't done in the past, and that will better inform the design and maybe make some changes of what street we would do.
So I guess just to give an example, so in the pavement maintenance project that year, Nielsen between Sonoma and Francis was scheduled to be grind and overlay. And I went out with a council member, and we looked at it and we're like, street's fine. And the PCI changed enough when staff rescored it that it dropped out. Now, that work would have been done, except the pavement project that was put out that year was so small that there were no bids came in. So fortunately, it wasn't done, and that adjustment was made before it was repackaged with the next year. So it was a pretty massive change. Was the 2015 PTAP, was that, I don't know if I recall correctly, but I know there's different frequencies. There's like a frequency for doing arterials, and there's a frequency for doing everything.
So
was 2015 an everything year or
I'm not sure. I know that the one we're doing right now is we're going to survey all our streets.
Okay, so I think it's every 5 years is all the streets. I don't know. Do you know, Commissioner Jovendell, by any chance? I thought it was like every 2 years arterials and every 5 years everything.
Not sure.
Okay.
But I think the point is, hopefully we're going to go out and confirm the treatment with the condition before we start design, and that's the first part of the design. And an example of the project we are doing right now, we selected a bit of a hybrid. We're doing part of it is we have lots of utility work going on. We have lots of and we wanted to get a project out there. We're doing a lot of dig outs to fix the base repair, doing crack sealing and doing slurry seal. Some of those roads maybe needed under a different condition, might have needed a grind and overlay, but given where we are and the uncertainty, if we were going to dig it up on a sewer project, this is a better approach.
Yeah, well, it was great Nielsen wasn't done because a few years later it got destroyed. So it really would have been a waste of money.
So another thing we have baked into this analysis, we're required to do a certain amount of sewer work every year, and we have that master plan baked into this this piece, at least within the near term.
Any other questions? Ken?
So it sounds like you have a survey program in for this summer. Are you doing any projects between now and the fall?
So we do have this, what we're calling a pavement management plan that does, or pavement management project that does slurry seal dig outs. We're doing I think a cape seal on Canes between Solano and Marin. First, we have to get the sewer done. That's on the schedule too. And I think we're doing Portland, so that project is in construction, we'll call it right now. We've had a kickoff meeting, and we're just trying to schedule the start date.
Right.
Then we are actively designing the reconstruction of Washington from San Pablo to Key Route. And an ideal world, we would be bidding that now, but we're behind on that project, and it's really just a staffing, we have a lot on our plate right now.
But it's in the queue, it sounds like, so that's great.
It's in design, and our intention is to finish the design and bid it and get it done.
You mentioned between San Pablo and Key Route, it looks like the damage goes all the way to Pomona, based on your map.
Okay, we'll take a look at that and adjust. Yeah,
There was some recent storm damage, and there's a manhole cover that sticks up in the middle of the road.
We'll take a look at it.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the commission?
You mentioned Cape Seal on Canes, and I appreciated in the slides that taking the wisdom that you shared last time, that Cape Seal is maybe the best on a cycling route, and Canes is scheduled to be a cycling route.
Yeah, I saw that.
Okay. Is it too late to do anything about that, or? You don't have to answer now on the record. You can think about it. You noticed, so.
There's a lot
Yeah.
tied getting that. So we'll look at that.
I mean, it's fairly recent
Yeah.
bit of information for the city, so.
Right.
I wouldn't blame you
We
if you
can't-
can't catch it that quick, but.
I mean, I think that's one of the things with controlling construction is,
Yes.
sort of one of the examples I use is at the Cerrito Creek. We've done a lot of work out there, and we've gotten, a lot of, good comments about the work done. That took a good 12, 18 months to get going because, it really getting everything in the right place. And then if you make a change at the end in the contractor, that's where we have troubles. And it'll be a lot worse than riding on a Cape Seal.
Yeah, okay. I accept your answer, thanks.
Any other questions from the commission?
I was just curious how SB1 funding is playing into this, if it is playing into SB1. Yeah, if it is playing
So we
into this.
have, every year we push out we have to identify a project, and we'll probably have to come to you guys first to tell the project before we go to council, and that'll probably be happening next meeting. So SB1 funding really gets blended into our overall plan. So the first year we paved Evelyn. This year we identified a number of streets within our slurry seal project that are being used, that will use it. And then this current year will be Washington.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
I was wondering if Washington was finally
So
gotten to because of SB1. So I think it's good for people to know that, hear that SB1 is bending the curve for us.
Well, absolutely. And this is going to be one of the things where you have an influx of SB1 money. What does that mean for us?
Means Washington, in part. anyway.
Well, it means we can do more.
Yeah, yeah,
Across the board.
yeah, great.
Okay. Any more questions? We do have a public comment, correct? Come on up.
My name's Hank Boverheis. I have a business on Cleveland Avenue, and I've been there for at least 10 years. There has been absolutely no effort whatsoever by the city to maintain this street. It has got to be the worst street in Albany, if not the second worst. The only decent piece of pavement on this street right now is a sewer repair that took place decades ago. It has become a one-lane road. We've had 2 accidents coming out of our driveway because people are driving on the smooth one-lane area of the street. And it's hard to see when you're coming out which direction the car is coming in because it's never on the right side of the yellow line. I work on classic sports cars and historic race cars, and I seem to be generating more work for my clients, road testing my cars out in Cleveland. I think what we ought to do is, instead of just having Cleveland in red as far as being very poor or failed, it should be in purple because there is no pavement left. Okay? I invite you all to drive on Cleveland. It's horrible. Do it during the morning commute. Take your life in your own hands. See what it's like. It's just, you know, it's you built your brand new maintenance facility down there, and to get to and from your maintenance facility doesn't leave a lot of confidence in your maintenance ability. I mean, there's like large holes everywhere along the avenue. It's hard to miss them. So as a survivor of a severe spinal injury, I would really like it to be smooth. I'd also like you to remember that speed humps are painful for those of us that have managed to avoid the wheelchair. And if you want to slow the traffic down in Peralta, make it like Cleveland. You can't go more than 15 miles an hour. When's it on the list?
We can.
I don't know when it's on the list. We haven't done that analysis, so I can't tell you that right now. But I've
never done an analysis. You built a new maintenance yard down there. You've never done an analysis on the way to get there?
No, we don't have analysis of when Cleveland is on the paving. I completely agree. I work in that building, and yeah, the pavement is horrible there, as it is in other areas around the city. So it's one of the things we need to address.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Back to the commission for comments.
I appreciate hearing that because I don't travel Cleveland regularly, so I will go check it out. I did have some other comments.
Yeah, if you want to.
I was going to go to my favorite spot over there. So I appreciated at the last meeting learning that Caltrans has a classification for local streets or streets that are not controlled by Caltrans, and that it was pretty in agreement with the reality in Albany, and that this body and Public Works decided to ignore that. That was helpful. But it led me to start thinking, to look at the general plan to see, I'm going to open.
Do you want the
Oh,
folder?
yeah, this one, yeah, okay. To see what that shows in terms of classification, and that led to some thoughts. So this is from the Albany general plan, and there's 4 classes, functional classes: major arterial, minor arterial, and collector. And there's several things about this that struck me as odd. Like Masonic is treated as a local or residential street north of Solano, which pretty much behaves more as a collector. I mean, it's got way more traffic from my experience. And these are the average daily motorist trips. Now, this is from the 2000 traffic management plan. I couldn't find any more recent data. I've got a lot more recent data in my head, but one thing I think it would be useful is to have a map like this that's better done than what I've done and is updated regularly as traffic counts are done around the city. But you can see that Masonic carries just north of Solano, and 2000 had 4,100 motorist trips a day, whereas Kane's north of Solano had 1,350. I know the streets, I live on Talbot, south of Brighton, and all those streets were counted, and they were under 1,000. So it carries way more traffic. And it actually carries more traffic than a lot of the collectors do. So you see Portland is shown as a collector, and it has 2,800 to 3,200. You see this part of Jackson, north of Solano, is shown as a collector. It has 1,100. So the counts don't match the functional classification for motorists in a lot of cases. So this is based on the counts, and the counts really conveniently sort of come in 3 spikes. So there's sort of 1,000 to 1,500 is one grouping, 2,500 to 5,000 is another grouping, and then there's the streets that carry over 10,000. So conveniently, we don't really have a statistical continuum. We've really got this trimodal distribution of average daily motorist trips. And so if you follow that statistical distribution, this is what it would look like in terms of which streets are your, whatever you want to call them. I guess streets there doesn't have minor arterials, so we'll call them collectors. In purple, the arterials in orange, and then everything else would be a residential street. So I'm interested in this. I mean, for instance, Washington has shown, if you go back to this, Washington has shown as a local or residential, and Portland's a collector, and they have exactly the same counts statistically. So it really doesn't make any sense. So I'm interested in the commission thoughts about saying, you know, okay, there's the general plan, but in terms of the reality of what's happening to pavement out there due to load, this is the map. This should be used as the base map, at least for where motorists are going for street saver analysis.
Can you give us an example of how this would affect the street saver results we saw tonight?
Well, so for instance, setting aside the cycling routes, the way it's classified now, Portland would have a higher priority or higher weighting in street saver than Washington. And that might be part of why Portland got fixed first. I don't know. I don't know the internals of street saver, but that's one example. Jackson, potentially this block of Jackson north of Solano could get fixed before Washington, even though it has a third of the motorist volume, because it's designated a collector and Washington is not. And let's see what else.
It's in pretty good shape, not an immediate threat.
I'm sorry, what?
The Jackson block is in pretty good shape.
Well, that might be why it's in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily, that sort of gets to another thought that came up when we're discussing these PCIs. Given the way our grid is laid out, it seems like one could set targets for the east-west streets that maybe are a little higher on PCI than the north-south local streets, because most people don't drive very far on the north-south streets typically, other than the collectors. People don't tend to drive all the way across the city on Cornell. So if you set a lower PCI for that street, then people are driving half a block or a block to get to their residence. They're doing most of their driving on the east-west streets and the major streets. And so if you set a higher PCI target for those, on average, people are driving on a higher PCI than trying to fix the pavement in front of every single residence in the city. But that's maybe a next conversation after this conversation.
When was the data from?
Microphone.
So this data is from 2000. That's the most recent sort of comprehensive map I could find. I tried to find an index of more recent data. And like I say, I mean, it somewhat matches my experience of the city even today, but.
Did the general plan EIR have any numbers?
I know I looked, actually, it had no data
Okay.
on average daily motorist counts on individual streets. So that's part of what maybe, I mean, I know there's lots and lots of counts done as a part of the traffic calming studies and various other studies. I didn't take the time to try to find all those and aggregate them.
More comment?
Can we see the next map again?
Sure.
So question for staff, is this possible in Street Saver, or do you have to rely on the classifications from Caltrans?
No, so we've gone away from the Caltrans classifications and used the general plan. I think our map previously looked closer to this. It had more of the east-west routes, either just because they're bike routes, we had them at collectors, so it looked a bit more like this one than our current map. I do want to say, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to the resolution where we could set one PCI target for north-south residentials and a different PCI target for the east-west residentials. It's just not that granular.
Interesting. More knowledge about Street Saver.
There might be a way, but
Yeah.
based on what I've learned, I
Yeah.
don't think it gets to that level.
I actually met with the MTC. I don't know if he was like the lead engineer, but one of the lead engineers on Street Saver. So I've got his card. I'll email him and see what he has to say about that.
But aren't you sort of doing that in essence, or proposing doing that by designating more east-west streets as collectors? Wasn't that up there priority? So sort of work around?
Yeah, so we would have to do it by changing its classification rather than its weighting or.
Target, yeah.
Yes, I think, that the cycling routes to some extent took care of some of it, but still, I think in the current classification, the map that was shown in the earlier slideshow, Masonic north of Solano is shown as local.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand that. We suspect that it was a continuation of Key Route, and because Key Route south of Solano narrows, and so this was a sort of a jog over to get to a larger street. That's what we thought.
Right, you can see Masonic north of Solano has the same, so the 4500 on Key Route applies to Key Route, the 4100 applies to Masonic, so it doesn't make sense that one is considered a minor arterial and the other one's considered a residential.
Makes some sense. Any other commissioners have comments on Preston's analysis of the street counts?
I do. First off, I want to say I agree with Ken that the functional classification is kind of a proxy for the volumes. So theoretically, we're assigning classifications to streets based on what volumes they are supposed to carry. Sometimes those volumes don't really match up with what we want. But another piece that kind of gets to what you're trying to come at from a different direction is that the deterioration of those streets, setting aside utility cuts, which are probably the biggest single source of damage to the streets, is trucks and cars, mostly the trucks. If we're saying that there's not a lot of volume of people going north-south on those local residential streets, we shouldn't see them deteriorate very fast. So, they have a low functional classification, low rate of deterioration. They ought to stay at a relatively high condition as long as we're not cutting them up, as compared to the streets that are carrying a heavier volume of traffic. So there's validity either way you approach it, but I think both methods can get you to a reasonable outcome. One of the things I did want to comment on you mentioned Cape seals, and while I agree that those are potentially troublesome on heavily traveled bike routes, I believe that a Cape seal was part of the treatment that was used on Masonic as kind of an interim pavement repair there, and that was actually surprisingly a good Cape seal. So this kind of goes to the point of how well do you construct something can make a really big difference in the effectiveness of it. Also, just the general observation that PCI is somewhat subjective. Someone goes out there and says, I think this is a 45. I think that one's a 65. Different person might come to a different number. This is why if we go recheck, sometimes we get different answers. But this goes back to that point of field reviewing the recommendations before we start implementing. I think that's a really good idea to say, okay, Street Saver and all the numbers and analysis said do an overlay. And you go out there and go, well, all this needs is a slurry seal, or this is way beyond an overlay. So we shouldn't get too caught up in our data. I think the field reviews, once we've been pointed in a rough direction, is a really great way to fine tune. So I strongly support staff doing that. So those are kind of my general comments on it. I think there are little tweaks like making sure that Masonic has the right functional classification north of Solano, because I don't think it really changes that much.
Well, my experience over the years, it does seem like Masonic degrades much faster than the street I live on 2 blocks over.
Absolutely, and I went down Masonic the other day and observed all the bad pavement was all utility cuts. So, I mean, I don't think it was a function of the volume of traffic. It was a function of us tearing up the street, or utility companies tearing up the street, and you're just driving on patches. The few sections of the road that hadn't been patched were actually really smooth.
Well, I don't know. I mean, after the winter storms south of Marin, there's places where it's clearly due to wear. I mean, there's potholes. They've probably been filled now because Public Works is really on it. But
the pavement's just washed out. Absolutely.
Yeah.
North of Solano is the section I was looking at.
Yeah.
And there I felt like it was really the utility work that had been the primary source of damage. And it's not going to be the same everywhere by any means. But again, I think trying to make sure that when utility work is done, we get the highest quality repairs done afterwards. And if it's, East Bay Mud or PG&E or whoever kind of telling them their repairs are either up to standard or not.
Actually, on the utility repairs, Robert Gonzalez, our CIP manager, I don't know if you've noticed East Bay Mud's utility project, and they're starting their paving. They're doing about a half a lane on every place, and that's because of Robert. He's working with them and showing. Normally, you get the 6 inches beyond the trench, and I think we're getting a much better solution here. As far as Street Saver, we use Street Saver is really the starting point. The end of Street Saver is a starting point of sort of our analysis, and what we call is I call it the budget Tetris or the Street Saver Tetris, where there's so many things that Street Saver can't take into, or any program can't take into consideration, and it's utility projects that we don't know about that we get blindsided by. There's always a public overlay where, hey, this wasn't the street we were planning, but this is the street everyone wants to do. Fine, we'll deal with that. And there's a lot of overlays that we do on really any project. We just don't press print on Street Saver and say this is our project and this is the treatment. And as far as how we want to link to, my idea of using the Caltrans maps is looking to the authority, or I can point to something and says this is what it said. I completely get that maybe reality might be different from that, but I always wanted to go back to a sort of a source document to say that this is the basis of our analysis. And if that gets updated over time, we'll update it. But to just go back and say, hey, here's where we got this is where we built it, because what we found is there's a lot of decisions that were made that, hey, this makes sense, but it's not well documented in terms of, and then you're looking back and, well, I don't understand why we did this. So if we can go back to a source document that's recognizable is really my preference.
But you just mentioned the Caltrans classifications. You're not using those, right?
We have a source document now that we're using, that we're saying is the document that we're going with.
From Caltrans, or?
No, the general plan.
Oh, the general plan, okay.
And then we actually did investigate. There is a process that we can do to go through and change the Caltrans maps to match our general plan. So we did look into that.
Great.
So given that getting the right functional classification is an important part of getting us headed in the right direction, it seems like, Preston had pulled some numbers from the 2000 traffic management plan, so the data collection for that we did in 1998. It's 20 years old. We've done a lot of traffic calming studies in the meantime. And if we get an intern or someone who's got a little spare time, it'd be really cool to pull together all those data sources and update a GIS map of the city with, ADT, flagging what year it came from. Because I definitely have seen some changes in traffic patterns. Sure. Solano west of Jackson is presumed in the 2000 traffic management plan to be a pretty low volume street. Functional classification is not very high. I mean, it's going over the hill, but I get to watch the traffic streaming through every morning, and I kind of wonder, what is the ADT there? It feels like it's a lot higher than 2000. But we have a lot of good sources of data, and I think that would help us, feed into future, pavement efforts, as well as any general plan updates that come along, to have, data, because it's costly. I mean, I forget what the price tag was on what we did for the traffic management plan, but ballpark $25,000 of data collection right there. And if we've picked up an equivalent worth, from traffic calming studies and so forth along the way, we can pull it together. I think it'd be a useful reference.
Are the classifications in the general plan carried over from previous, or how are they identified with updated traffic counts?
The general plan approved a couple of years ago just carried forward from the previous general plan.
Okay.
And I appreciate Preston's analysis, and I think the next time we open up the general plan, we probably should have a conversation about this. I don't recall it coming up when we were looking at the transportation element. We did do some counts at some of the major streets, and I can provide that to you. It's in the draft EIR. See if there were any changes.
Okay.
So if I flip back and forth between, so this is general plan. This is what I'm proposing for street saver. So it'd be 2,000 to 8,000 in the intermediate category. There's only 3 changes. So one is making Washington intermediate. Washington from San Pablo to eastern city limit, intermediate class or collector class. Taking out Washington and Jackson west of San Pablo and north of Solano as collector class, again, based on the counts. And I think there was one other one? Actually, there might have just been those. Oh, and Masonic, north of Solano. So I would like to move those 3 changes in classification for, obviously it won't be in the general plan, but for planning purposes.
Is that a motion?
That's a motion.
Okay.
So I'd like to ask staff, do you think you can run a rerun Street Saver to see what change this would have?
Yeah, I'm glad we didn't complete our analysis. I knew this was coming, so I just. I mean, it's just time. We can tweak whatever we need to tweak. We just at some point, we just want to settle on what we want to be, where we want to be, because we can't move forward on any of the analysis and make any sort of recommendations until we settle on something. And at some level, I'm less concerned about what we settle on as more of just let's settle on something, and then we can lock that down and then move forward with an analysis. I think this looked a lot like the collectors that included all the bike routes. I think it was probably pretty similar. Maybe it didn't include all of Washington, but it had most of it, I think. I don't know if you have that slide.
I don't. I think that, yeah, it probably would. I mean, the bike routes would cover more.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the next conversation.
I'll second.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can you clarify what the motion was?
Yeah, sure. So the motion is to reclass Washington east of San Pablo as collector, reclass Masonic north of Solano as a collector, and reclass Washington east of San Pablo as a residential or local, I can't remember what the term is, in Jackson north of Solano as a local. So I guess you could say that's 4 changes.
It looks like you've also changed Solano between Masonic and Cleveland.
It's a color change.
Yeah, so so this map is based on the 3 functional classifications that Street Saver allows. So I presume the minor arterials get treated as collectors currently in the runs, or do they get treated as arterials?
I'm not sure.
I mean, I would think they get treated as collectors, because if you look at most of them, they have vastly less motorist traffic. Masonic and Key Route are vastly different from Marin and Solano. So I think, my guess is that already, for purposes of what's happening in Street Saver, that whole segment of Solano is one functional classification. But happy to add that to the motion.
No, I'm just trying to understand if 2,000 to 8,000 ADT is a collector in this scheme, or?
Well, it's whatever you want to call the middle classification. I mean, Street Saver only has 3 classifications, so call it whatever you want. It's the middle classification.
Does that make sense?
And I want the map. That'll help.
Okay.
Yeah, I will.
So there is a motion. Did you guys understand? Get the motion down, and there is a second for that. So we should vote on that motion.
I'm sorry, if you could just clarify, so this is just
Sure.
for this purpose, for the
Correct.
pavement?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Maybe you can amend the motion that way, or clarify the motion that way.
That's how I understood that. This
Okay.
is with respect to Street Saver. If changing the general plan is a whole other thing.
It's not on the
We're doing
agenda
that
tonight.
completely unnoticed, off the grid. It's a good question, though.
All right. So let's take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Seeing none, the motion passes. Is there additional discussion on staff's presentation? Ken, please.
We had public comment, and we had a piece of.
Oh, yeah. Cleveland.
Sorry, I'm blanking.
Public correspondence. Yes. Thank you. So as far as the public comment goes, I'm wondering if the business plan of the new food truck servicing location includes, undercarriage work. If they located there so that they could get more business that way. I'm being facetious again. But there will be increased traffic on that street. Actually, based on our recent experience coming off the freeway and heading south, if there were a lot of food trucks getting off the freeway and heading north on Cleveland, it would be really hard to get off the freeway onto Cleveland going south, just from a visibility standpoint. It's not a great intersection, and I think we should have it on our radar as we go forward.
Okay. Good comment.
And then there's the correspondence about the 900 block of Pomona and a particular tree. This seems a little specific for the discussion that we're having tonight, but I'm not sure where else it fits.
I saw that, but I'm blanking on the details right now.
So there's a couple, they have a tree, their sidewalk has been reconstructed once before. I think they say the city is proposing to reconstruct the sidewalk again. They're saying the roots of the tree are actually affecting the street pavement, and they're having trouble now accessing their driveway, and they're worried that the driveway will become impassable.
Look at it. I think this is one of the challenges of the sidewalk program, where we have someone doing the sidewalk piece of it, but if you have roots uplifting the sidewalk, that happens on the gutter, curb and gutter, as well as in the street, and different contractors, different things. So we'll take a look at that.
I'm happy to pass it back to staff, and you can just let us know what happens. Thank you.
Other comments on this item?
So the other bit of discussion I wanted to have, and probably not to apply to the current runs because I think it's a longer conceptual discussion, but was to head towards a multimodal weighting system. So you can kind of ignore the numbers here for the first part, just in terms of the theoretical construct. There'd be a weight based on the functional classification for private motorists. There'd be a weight based on truck routes, a weight based on bus routes, and then a weight based on biking routes, and the weight that would be applied would be the sum of all those for a street. And the reason I thought of this again is because meeting with that engineer in MTC, and you alluded to it in your comments, I had thought there was just the 3 hardwired weights. A street can only be a residential, a collector, or a local collector, and an arterial. And he said, no, you can add in, you can create weights, add in weights, customize the weights however you want. So it does have that flexibility. So we would actually have the opportunity to create a true complete street multimodal approach to weighting different streets if we wanted to. So as an example, just using these numbers, and I won't go through it in great detail, but so as an example, using these numbers, and you've got Buchanan at the top, which is an arterial, a semi-truck route, a bus route, and a biking route, so it has the highest weight because it's serving all 4 functional classifications. At the other end, you have local streets that they're only local for motorists, and that's it, and they have the lowest weighting. And then various things in between. And so it, some interesting things it does is like differentiate Solano and Marin. So Solano's an arterial, a semi-truck route, and a bus route. Marin's a bike route. This would weight Solano a little bit higher because it's serving those heavier vehicles and those other functional classes. Now, that kind of depends upon what weights you assign to each of the functions. Yeah.
Isn't Marin an arterial as well? Oh, I see.
Yeah, it is. So yeah, it is an arterial.
It's not a bus route or a truck route.
Right,
okay.
Right. And so the idea is, from what I've read, buses and trucks impose tremendously more damage. I mean, even searching on the net, it's actually a 4th power law with the weight of the vehicle. So, a semi-truck is computed to have 10,000, be the equivalent of 10,000 private vehicles in terms of the damage it imposes on pavement. And then vice versa, if you look at street saver, if you look at pavement as a way to manage risk and reduce cost of travel, because pavement is not an end in of itself. Its purpose is to make it easier to get around, less risky to get around. I would imagine the damage that a poor pavement can impose on a vehicle is much higher for a semi-truck than it is for a private vehicle, just because the amount of weight that's loaded into those things. I don't know that. I haven't found numbers on that yet. And as far as the, what numbers should be in here, that's something that would be good to discuss with an actual traffic engineer. I took some stabs at that, but I'm not as focused on that as, what is the commission's interest in, given that Street Saver has the flexibility to use different weights. Again, not for this run, because I think it'd be too complicated to implement for this run. Yeah, too complicated to implement for this run, but to start having the commission give its impression of whether to head this direction or not.
Did you get any indication that the MTC is interested in working on this on their end and rolling it in on their end?
So their staff member to the active transportation working group said this sounded like a great issue to take up in their active transportation planning. I have no idea. I mean, usually the timeline on something like that is a year or more. I mean, they're just starting. So if we wanted to have something like this in the pipe for the next pavement maintenance project design for next year, for 2020, although maybe that's what, I don't know if the current runs are for 2020 to design the 2020 project.
So really I guess what we're using this is to set a funding level of where we can be. And then, again, we don't rely on Street Saver necessarily to pick our streets for us. So, I'm not sure how much our decision to pave streets will change with this added resolution, because there's so many other factors that go into it that it really gives you buckets of streets that are roughly in the same classification, and you choose from those based on a whole bunch of other factors that some were in our control and some were not.
Well, so maybe let me ask it this way. My understanding is as a part of these runs, another weighting factor was created
So it has
recycling routes.
It has an other category.
Right.
And we had populated that. I guess I haven't seen it, but there's a couple of alleys in our city that were in the other category that are not represented now. But we've used that category for this bike route. So I don't know if there's another, if you can
If there's
add
only
more,
one,
if you can
right.
add more, or if you can say, hey, these are both arterials, we're weighting this arterial higher than this arterial. So I'm not sure it can do that. I know you can change the weighting, and that's one of the things we're doing, and we got sort of funky results. But I don't know if you can do a weighting by street.
And what weight was used for the other category?
Well, we did a couple. Well, based on the discussion here, we did one where it was weighted as a collector, and then we had one that it was more weighted on as a residential, and then we were kind of playing with it, and that's where we got some of the results that wasn't coming out right.
Yeah.
So if I might inquire, I'm kind of trying to figure out where this would get us and what we would gain from trying to pursue something like this. You mentioned how trucks and buses have a much greater load on the roadway and cause more damage. So you basically calculate an equivalent single axle load, based on the number of trucks and the weight of trucks, et cetera, and that goes into calculating the pavement index, not the pavement condition index, but the type of pavement, the thickness of pavement that you want to put on the road. So that's an engineering design factor, which we would take into account if we're doing a roadway reconstruct, to know how many layers of aggregate base, or how many inches of aggregate base, how many inches of asphalt paving above that we would use in order for the road to hold up. But aside from that, are we trying to get into sort of a prognostication of how fast the pavement is going to break down based on the loading we're putting on it?
Well, so that is what is presented as the purpose of providing different weights to different streets within the Street Saver manual. I take a different perspective on it, which is that the purpose of pavement is to minimize risk to society of travel.
Yeah.
And so to the extent that buses travel on certain streets, and they carry a tremendous number of people, particularly in this area, the 18 and the 72, it's an argument for saying bus routes should be, in reasonable shape, more so maybe than a local street. Now that weighting's already in there, but if you have an arterial that's not a bus route and an arterial that's a bus route, it's a way of bringing that in, which right now, Street Saver is completely blind to that. And the reason I'm interested in bringing these in is because I'm aware that every city basically adjusts the answer that comes out of Street Saver. And it was an interesting meeting item at the Active Transportation Working Group because the lead engineer was completely resistant to considering anything other than basically motorist classification. The guy from Albany, CTC, who has since moved on to Fremont, he came back and said, well, I think it'd be really interesting to do a survey of what do cities actually do with the results that come out of Street Saver. Like, hint, hint, they're doing a lot with it, Mr. Engineer, and they're not. And that guy's an engineer too. He's like, his lead engineer's impressions was kind of giving this impression like, well, this is the answer, and my interest is to get the weighting factors so that they are more closely tied to risk management and the risk to the users of the road. And so the answer that comes out of Street Saver is objectively close, or is closer to an objective answer. Because through the years when I brought this up, people are like, well, we make all sorts of ad hoc policy qualitative adjustments after the fact, and that's fine. But in terms of behavioral economics and negotiating, it's been shown in psychological experiments, the answer you start with, the answer you end with depends upon the answer you start with. I mean, that's just basic negotiating theory. So if you get an answer out of Street Saver that is not as close objectively to risk management as possible at the outset, you're not going to get to the answer, the best answer at the end. You're going to start out with a poor answer at the beginning. There's a phenomenon psychologically called anchoring, where you only move a certain distance away from the original answer. If you start with a different original answer, you move to a different point at the end. So I think there is value in making Street Saver a more objectively engineering-oriented tool for risk management.
Okay, but I mean, we just threw out a batch of results because they didn't look right. We're not even talking about that tonight. So I'm a little concerned. This could take a lot of time and effort to run the numbers and crank through all this. How many % difference is it going to be in our answer? And then if we go and apply sort of the common sense factor to revamp most of it, if we were a larger scale city, maybe it'd be really important. Mm-hmm. The size we are, I mean, you just made some manual adjustments to our road classifications that we all approve because we can kind of picture most of the streets in our heads and go, yeah, that makes sense. If we were, a city the size of Los Angeles, maybe this starts to become a really important way to differentiate between thousands of street miles, but we're just not that big. So, I mean, I think it's pretty cool. I'd want to dig through and understand sort of the ramifications between how does this play out relative to what numbers are already going into the roadway design. Because if we know that a road carries more trucks and buses, we're going to give it a thicker pavement section, so that's going to manage our risk. It won't break down as fast. If a road, is deteriorating to a certain point where it's got potholes in an arterial, that's not acceptable. We're going to fix that, regardless how many trucks and buses it's got. So I'm a little bit kind of thinking about what's the end result and effectiveness of it, and just sort of looking at these numbers show up both in the design and the prioritization. The PCI kind of is its own factor on top of this, and some of these I don't care if it double counts in the functional classification and the PCI, but all of these kind of play into coming up with what Street Saver gives us, and that's not even the end result. I get the anchoring concept, but I don't think it's really that kind of negotiation. We're trying to, start with something rational. We get sort of, political priorities thrown at us sometimes, or things that, the engineers will just look at it and say, this doesn't make sense because that road is deteriorated beyond what we can accept, so we're going to shift things around to make adjustments. So I don't know if there's anything for us to do with this other than kind of, what you've already been doing, sharing it with the engineers at MTC, to see if they're interested in sort of pushing this out and experimenting with it more on a broader scale. Because I'd love to see a more comprehensive analysis of it. It sounds like conversationally, I don't know how far they've dug into it. If they can come back and give us a presentation on it, you know, the folks who use it on a regular basis, that'd be really interesting to hear. I don't know that I'm ready to do anything with it tonight.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm wondering for the size of our city, we know where the semi-truck routes are and we know where the bus routes are. So is that, what would this do? Would it change any other classifications or prioritization? And it all depends on the weights, right? So
like you see Pierce, which is a collector, it gets bumped up because it's a bus route over the other collectors. So most of the collectors in the city are not bus routes. So it's another example of subarterial, how it could make a change. In terms of the pavement design, I didn't go into the numbers, but I sort of put some thought in that because when I read that a semi-truck has 10,000 times the load, essentially, the bending load on the pavement, I mean, the weighting factor in street saver is not 10,000 times for an arterial. It's twice, I think. It's like 0.5 for a local and 1 for an arterial, I think. So I think to some extent there, and that was done based on an expert elicitation of public works directors in the 1980s, and it hasn't been changed since then, which is kind of like, I think engineering science has advanced a little bit in the meantime. But I think the reason that the arterial is only 2 times the residential is because they're taking into account inherently that the pavement section is different. But even though the pavement section is different, it still wears a bit faster. But I mean, I don't get the sense that even when the pavements on a truck route are rebuilt, that they necessarily last as long as the pavements on a residential street. Just from a cost perspective, you know, it's kind of like optimizing the cost, that you have to go so far to do that.
Right. I mean, some engineers will tell you that it's almost not worth even counting the number of cars on a street to figure out what the deterioration is, that at that point the deterioration is all time, weather, and utility work. If all you've got on the street's cars or bikes, they're not damaging the pavement.
Right.
As long as you've got a reasonable pavement section constructed. Where you've got the trucks and buses, that's where the vehicles start to come into the equation to cause the deterioration.
So it doesn't seem like we'd be able to take this in consideration for this cycle, but I think it's great for staff to discuss at MTC and probably on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
There's some thought to making it less subjective, the process, with more nuance.
And maybe what can happen with it, because this body made a recommendation to City Council that it pass a resolution or send something to MTC saying we want Street Saver to be a complete streets compliant tool. Maybe this could go along with that, as, you know, this would be one approach to have sort of this multi weights that get summed together, a weights for each functional class that then gets summed together.
Or is there a complete streets policy that we can amend to talk about paving?
Well, you would certainly do a resolution like that. I don't see any problem with that. And incorporating it into the complete streets policy, I suppose we could. I don't know if we need to in order to advocate at MTC, but.
I mean, I think complete streets policy as it exists currently, if you look at it, drives this approach. So it's just compliant with complete streets policy. It doesn't actually, you know, so the flow is from the policy to this rather than the other way around.
Right. My expectation is, you know, applying our complete streets policy, if we come up with 2 collectors that need paving and one of them's a bus route, we pave the bus route.
Right.
Or, you know, similarly, if it's, you know, bike route versus non-bike route, those become deciding factors to break ties or even nudge something ahead of something else. I do think a resolution from council suggesting that MTC try to incorporate a more multimodal approach in Street Saver totally makes sense.
Motion?
Well, I think we made the motion for council to do that, so I'm happy to just provide this information, and I mean, unless you want to make a motion.
When did we do that?
That was two meetings ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
In January. So it has not gone to council yet, but.
Got it.
But I mean, I'm happy to provide a write-up on this or whatever. They can go along with the resolution
Okay.
if and when. Thanks for the discussion and letting me
So we
take
can-
up all that time.
Commissioner Jordan work with staff, provide you guys more information to develop the resolution.
Yes, be happy to.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments on this item? Okay, hearing none. And you guys just needed general feedback from the commission, is that correct? Or staff?
Yeah, we got what we need,
Okay.
and a little more.
Quite a bit more. So when would we expect to either see a glimpse of a project or the next time you come back with sort
Results,
of
yeah.
street paving?
My hope was we would come back to the next meeting. This adds a little more work to that piece. We hoped we would just be working the runs and getting that information, so we're going to have to go back and do some functional, changing in the functional classes. I don't think that's a huge amount of work, so we will target the next meeting to come back, and if not, it'll be the meeting after.
So when would this all likely go out to a construction bid?
So I think we have time, because really what this is going to do is inform the next
year?
update of the CIP, where we're going to lay out funding levels.
Okay. So we're not in danger of trying to do a bid in the middle of summer, which is a terrible time to
right.
do
So
it.
the projects that are in design, that are in construction will be constructed. The project that's in design will be designed and then constructed, and it will probably be, into next year, fiscal year, when we bid.
To bid in the fall or
In the fall, and maybe come out of the winter.
Okay.
Constructing, and so we have some time to figure out what streets we want to do.
Great.
Okay. Great. Okay, item 5.3 is the commission work plan.
Yes, so this is you discussed this at your last meeting, a couple changes. First of all, after the last meeting, I learned that there's a standard format that the city clerk would like us to use, so we've incorporated that format into this draft, and also tried to capture the comments that you made at the last meeting succinctly, capturing your comments at the last meeting and incorporating it into here. Just a reminder, it doesn't have to have every last item that you may want to discuss over the course of the next couple of years. It's more capturing the big picture things to make sure that we're not losing track of them. And also keep in mind that you're basically mapping out 20 meetings, and at the most 20 meetings, and on some of these major things you need 2 or 3 meetings to work through them. So again, kind of some discipline about what, and being strategic about what you'd like to have on here and what it would be okay not to work on. We don't want to disappoint you by not getting things done on your work plan, but we also only have so much time to work on things on the work plan, so maybe your help on striking that balance. So I don't think there was anything of, if there's something missing from your previous discussion that was inadvertent, and certainly welcome those corrections, or if you have some new ideas that you want to discuss, that's great. And it will make hopefully, if you land on a final work plan that you can recommend to City Council, it would probably go to the council in the May or June timeframe. We're kind of mapping out which committee and commission is going at which meeting. And hopefully one or more of you could attend the meeting to speak to this when that goes to council. Be happy to answer any questions or take any additional comments or corrections.
Questions? Yes.
Under the strategic plan items, and I'm realizing now I didn't go back and look at the draft that just came out yesterday. It seems like the last two are fairly similar. Are those called out separately in the strategic plan? I mean, one is improve streets and street lighting, and the next one is improve streets and street lighting.
Yes, you're correct.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look to see. if that's a typo or, now we prepared this using not the draft that came out yesterday.
Okay,
We worked on this last week, so
fair enough.
I didn't even know there was a new draft out.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how new it is. It's just, it went out, it was publicly posted, I should say, yesterday. I don't know when it was actually prepared.
Yeah, I don't either. We used the one that was last publicly available to the,
Oh, okay.
the
Yeah.
last went to council a couple months ago.
Yeah, so this one is, well, at least in format, it's like completely different. I don't know if the items are different or not. I haven't compared them head to head.
So what I would probably do with your concurrence is modify the city council strategic plan items to match the new version of their strategic plan.
And then the new strategic plan under each objective has two buckets. It has one that's like, you know, a committed bucket, and then the other bucket is for the council's consideration whether to add or not. It's called like a potential work plan item. And in the potential bucket is the parking management plan. It's not actually in the, yes, we definitely want to do this bucket. And so I don't think we can, so we don't know if it's in, you know, even if this commission wants to take that on, which is another discussion for deliberation later, at this point, it's not actually part of the strategic plan. So we wouldn't know until Monday whether it's in this part of the work plan or not, to my understanding, if I understand the logic of this. Okay.
Other questions?
Either I'm getting older or this commission is getting more complex.
Comments?
Comments?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So on the parking management plan, from what I've looked at, and I haven't read it in exhaustive detail, but this is the one that was adopted, I think, in 2017. My recollection is that it found that the parking occupancy in the two study areas was sufficiently low that paid parking on the arterials was not recommended, or switching to paid parking on the arterials was not recommended. I think it did have some language about residential parking permit program, but the general impression I got was nothing needs to change. Now, maybe I'm up here, and if you go down, you know, at a real detailed level, there were some things that need to change. But based on that high level, I was sort of like, well, do we really need to have a parking management plan study session as a part of our work plan? Do we really want to do that over the next 2 years or not? Based on the results of that engineering study.
I would, if I may respond, you know, I think that's a tool that you can use if you're dealing with issues, you know, when we're looking at a particular project, maybe we bring that study out to inform your discussion. And unless the city council, parking is an issue that the city, you really want the city council behind you. If you're going to take that on, don't spend the time and energy if the city council really doesn't want to hear your recommendation. Would be what I would suggest. I realize that there are lots of innovative things happening in the parking management world, but ultimately it's a very political thing, and I think you have to let the council tell you when they're ready to take it on.
Well, I think I'm agreeing with that. So in the strategic plan right now, there's no commitment to it. It's for consideration. So we'll see what happens Monday. I mean,
So thinking that the third bullet under the city council strategic plan items would get striked?
Yeah, I mean, as of the plan that came out yesterday, it is not.
Oh, it's
part
not
of the
even,
strategic
okay,
plan.
okay.
It's in the bucket of things the council can consider.
Got it.
Adding to the plan.
Got
So
it.
as of this moment, it's not an item, and I wouldn't, agreeing with Jeff, I mean, I wouldn't suggest that we take it up of our own
So do we,
accord.
Drop it from
Change
this,
it
or
from
just
ours,
leave
yeah.
it there
Do we
as
change
something
ours?
we could pick up later?
Well, I think it's whatever the council decides, as he says. I just wanted to flag it as something I don't see that
Right.
we would want to take on of our own initiative.
it also seems like this document is representative of the commission, so we'd want to be consistent with what the council document was.
And the other thing you can do is when this document does go to the council, you can, in your presentation to them, say, this is something that you talked about, and please, council, tell us what, they can add things to your work plan at that point if they wanted to, or take them off. So
Right.
do whatever you want to do, and they'll make the correction if they feel like they need to.
So my preference is so the first section is sort of what council is directing us to do through the strategic plan, and then the other two sections are coming from other sources. Some documents that are approved by the council but not in the strategic plan. So my preference would be to take the parking study session out altogether. I
agree.
I don't want to recommend it that this body wants to take it on. I think it purely needs to come from the council.
I completely agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
I don't know that do you need a motion on any of this stuff?
I think you're going to ultimately need a recommendation from the
Well,
commission.
Oh, yeah, I guess that'll come back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I'll make a motion to incorporate all of our comments.
Thanks.
Which so far is not
Makes it
much.
Any other comments on the work plan?
I've got a couple. But
Yeah, no, let's go ahead.
Yeah, under other work plan items, first circle, 4 bullets from the end, expenditure of sugar sweetened beverage tax revenues. That's something where we're asked for our opinion. We don't really spend any time on it. Can we drop that? Commissioners, it comes up, we get asked.
Right,
Sorry,
we don't
move on.
take initiative.
It's fine with me.
Sure.
I think shorter is better.
Yeah, I'm trying to find things that aren't necessarily needed on here because there's a lot on here.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask for a couple more. So, right. So things that I didn't see on here, which could be items or could just be upcoming agenda items, be things like continued monitoring of the signal phasing and just the overall effectiveness of the hawk signal and the light at Monroe and San Pablo. A big one for me is Marin Buchanan Phase 4, and I know we talked about that last time.
Yeah, didn't I see that on here?
I'm not seeing it. I just reread it.
So you're saying we need to add that?
There's the review,
Phase 3.
Phase 3, and
Yeah.
we do plan to come back to you with Phase 4.
I'm very interested in making it explicit.
Commission, council, discussion, that's fine.
Okay.
We dropped the Safe Routes to School feature on Marin and Cornell. I'd like to keep that on the radar. Cornell is a school that we haven't yet really supported at all with infrastructure. Maybe they have different priorities, but I'd at least like to have the discussion.
I agree with that.
Yeah, particularly because Cornell is the last elementary school standing. I mean, Ocean View and Marin are going to be.
It's the earliest built and the only one that's not being rebuilt.
We did something right back then.
So yeah, it would be nice for people to be able to get there safely.
Yeah. Others?
I think that's good for me.
I had another potential in the policy initiatives delete, which was, but this could well be because I don't fully understand what it's referring to. It said the last bullet, including cycle paths in future work plans. I mean, that's kind of a generic statement, which.
I think we were trying to capture what was mentioned at the last meeting. Maybe that didn't capture your intent.
What was that? You don't remember?
I thought there was a comment that you wanted to make sure that we worked on closing the gaps in some of the cycle. cycle track?
Well, I think the cycle track on San Pablo, that cycle track gap is in here, I believe.
Maybe not.
So we can drop that bullet point
Okay.
if it's not doing anything for it.
Let's see, Zone.
Could I amend Buchanan Phase 4 and completion of cycle track between Sprouts and Buchanan?
Well, so it's the last, so the cycle track, closing the
Oh, I
cycle
see,
track
it's
gap
there.
is the last
Yeah, I
bullet
see, it's
under projects. So I don't think we need that last bullet under policy. Again, simplifying.
Unless you want to make it a complete streets statement.
Well, I mean, we have complete streets policy. It
Okay.
applies to everything we do, so.
I'm willing to take out the last policy bullet.
Yeah. Looking back at the notes, it was a very specific request about the cycle track between Buchanan, Sprouts and Buchanan, and then
Which is
I think
covered at
that's
the end of the document.
It is.
Very last bullet.
Sound Wall. Yeah, I think that was it.
And then under projects and the public projects, let's see, there's one that's safety and effectiveness improvements for bicycle, pedestrian, public transit, and vehicles. That again seems really generic, at least for that section.
Where's,
That's the sixth bullet in that section. I mean, that kind of goes without saying that that's
bicycle, pedestrian, public transport.
what we try to do with every project.
Aren't we going to sort of address that when we look at the code to make sure that the code is up to date for our commission?
That could be, then it could be combined with the first bullet under the policy then, if that was the intent of that, rather than have it under projects as a separate bullet. I mean, we have updating municipal code provisions. Well, are you talking about the other aspects of the code? Actually, that part of the code is just regards this commission. I mean, are there parts of the code that relate to would tangibly bend the curve on safety and effectiveness? I don't know, I haven't read the code, so.
No, I was just thinking of the commission portion of the code.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I can ask staff, but again, I'm just doing a high-level plain read of that. Was there something behind it?
I don't recall how that emerged.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it may be a holdover from the previous work plan from 2 years ago.
Okay.
No problem taking it out from my perspective.
Okay. And then I would suggest deleting and/or combining master plan for city street lighting with the two last strategic plan bullets, which both relate to lighting as well. Since that's, I mean, I think it should go under the highest level of the hierarchy, which is the strategic plan
Makes sense.
directive from council. And there's an item here about encroachments, and that refers to permanent encroachments. I would prefer if the term long-term encroachments was used, because to say permanent has a policy implication in terms of what this body or some other bodies might decide about those encroachments and how long they should last.
I'm lost. Which bullet?
Let's find encroachment. So that is the third bullet under the policy, in the policy section.
Great. Got it.
And let's see. Yeah, and I think to support what Commissioner McCroskey brought up about also including the signal at Monroe and San Pablo. I mean, it can either be its own item or included with the Hawk signal, whatever makes sense to staff in terms of reassessment. Because I think there's some potential improvements that could be made there as well. Under projects, I asked the commission's interest in looking at repurposing the parking that is chronically underutilized on the east side of Masonic, which occurs in some blocks. I think in the last meeting I brought up, potentially that parking could be repurposed as part of the greenway. So about half the blocks, or half the length of Masonic, the parking on the east side is consistently underutilized. On other parts, it's consistently maximally utilized. But like south of Dartmouth, if you added that part of the, anyway, that's what I'm proposing for consideration. I mean, that might be a joint consideration with Parks, Recreation, and is it open space now? Parks, Recreation, and open space. This is sort of at the junction between the two jurisdictions.
I'm a little scared what's going to happen when Berkeley cracks down on RVs. And I know we have our own regulation.
We have our own regulation. Passed about, 8 years ago. It's one of the fastest things I've ever seen Albany do. Happened in 6 months from the time a resident came in and said, do this, to when it was done. It was pretty amazing. So actually, that almost sounds like a reason to get rid of that parking, because then there's no parking. It's a part of the park, and they can't park there. Takes away that capacity. So is there any interest in having that on the work plan?
Yeah, I'm fine with including it.
I'm neutral.
Okay.
I don't think we're going to be able to fund it, but we can come up with the idea.
Yeah. And then I brought up the phase two, I don't know what it's technically called, sound wall along the south end of the 500 block of Pierce Street. And Commissioner McCroskey rightly said, how does that relate to the jurisdiction of this commission? And so I came up with, that's where the bike path is all supposed to be, right there, the extension of the bike path. So I think those kind of go together. So completing the Cerrito Creek Connector Trail through Peggy Thompson Pierce Street Park, also including this sound wall question, would be an addition.
And that may have some urgency because of a building at the corner of Washington and
Right. Cleveland. Yeah. So this body should definitely weigh in on the plans for that building in terms of how it articulates with that bike path. Yeah, it's a really good reason to have it on the work
So
plan.
maybe you want to broaden out the topic a little bit? No, it's the Cerrito Creek Connector Trail.
Yeah.
To the Buchanan Parkway.
Right. I'm finishing or status update, I don't know how we want to put it, but to have the Cerrito Creek Connector Trail completion consideration in the work plan. But should we specifically reference the affordable housing project?
Well, as long as we all understand it, I think it's okay. I think it takes more weight if we use the Buchanan Trail connection.
Yeah.
To give it a real.
Okay. Sounds good.
So how would you word that?
Review of status and design of Cerrito Creek Connector Trail between in the gap between 500 block of Pierce Street and Buchanan.
I would say Buchanan Pathway.
Buchanan Pathway. Thank you. Let's see. There was, let's see, the Planning and Zoning Commission last night, in developing the work plan, it was brought up bringing more definition into the code regarding the mandatory provision of protected bicycle parking in new residential developments. And staff in that meeting said that would be an appropriate topic, more appropriate topic for this body to take up, since I guess this body has more expertise on bike parking. So I'd like to see that on the work plan. And the reason for that is I've seen development proposals come in where Like at first they don't have any bike parking, and then they show bike racks outside, and they kind of made a generic statement, oh, well, we're going to have covered bike parking, we're going to have protected bike parking, but they never really committed to defining what that was. So I think we need more definition in that code, particularly because this development is, well, it's 3 units right now and only has 3 parking spaces, and it's right off Solano, so they're really relying on the bike parking, and their plan is to come back based on a code change that the city council made and re-propose the project as a 4-unit project with 3 parking spaces. And there's something in the code about they can provide a certain number more bike parking spaces to get leeway not to put in at least 1 car parking space per unit. So that makes the bike parking like really important to get right. And I don't have a sense that the developer's really necessarily doing that. Not maybe either because of lack of expertise, I don't know, but they haven't showed it to us yet. So I think having definition in the code would be helpful.
So we went through a process 2 or 3 years ago, Jeff?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and I don't recall exactly when, but recently the parking standard, when we made it would have been after the 2016 election, so it had been 2017 when residential parking standards were updated. The planning and zoning code was updated at that time. We can bring that language to you, and you can see if you feel like you want to make a recommendation to further develop that.
Yeah, it might be that protected parking can be construed in a number of different ways. I think it refers to protected parking. I don't recall right now, but somebody can consider a bike rack underneath an awning protected parking.
I think we were talking about secure parking.
I remember something, yeah.
I haven't read it recently, but at least 3 of us worked on that. And how about a first step would be how many projects have come under that provision, and how were they handled?
Can I suggest that maybe this is you've got a statement for the work plan. That's great. We can agendize discussing bike parking for a future meeting.
Okay.
That's good.
And in terms of language, I'd like to get away from the language right of way, because I've watched, which is included in here right now under projects in the public right of way. And the reason for that is I've watched 3 out of the 5 planning and zoning commissioners not understand that the city of Albany actually owns the property that the streets and the sidewalks reside on, which if the planning and zoning commissioners, if a majority of the planning and zoning commission doesn't understand that, then basically nobody understands that. Because pretty much everything they do is dependent upon where are the property lines. So it was pretty shocking, I have to say, frankly. So I would really like the language to change so that it can allay to some extent this confusion about whether this is an easement on private property, the roads, the sidewalks, the street trees, or if the city actually owns it, which the city owns it. So the change I'm suggesting is to change it from on the following improvements to the public right-of-way to on the following public property street improvements. So that's the title of the 3rd section.
Could you say that again? I just found where we were referencing.
Sure, yeah. So provide a public forum and make recommendations to City Council on the following public property street improvements, or street improvements on public property, or street improvements on city property.
Yeah. See, there's distinct legal definitions of those things, so I think just randomly changing the words makes me a little uneasy. I'm not very comfortable with that.
Okay. Well, so when I look, and obviously it's not an authoritative source by any means legally, but it is in terms of common colloquial parlance. If you look up right away, first thing that comes up is the Wikipedia page, and it defines it as an easement. It doesn't define it as public property.
If I could weigh in on this.
Property could be the city council chambers or on public property, but this is not right-of-way.
Well, that's why I was saying street improvements on public property.
Maybe I can help. There are two different definitions of right-of-way. There's a real estate definition and there's a transportation definition. And I'm already wired to say, well, right-of-way. I'm going to have a really hard time not using that phrase, at least in the transportation context. And I think most of the professionals that are going to come to you to make presentations are going to use the term right-of-way. So I'm sorry that the Planning and Zoning Commissioners got confused about that, but the terminology that we use is what 99% of the transportation professionals in California use. I don't know that this is going to help you communicate to other people by kind of keeping us from using the term right-of-way. Like I say, I'm sorry the Planning and Zoning Commissioners were confused there. They certainly know where property lines are. They see a survey, property survey with every single application, so they understand where the city right-of-way ends. Or see, there I go. Where the city-owned portion of the property and the privately owned portion of the property is. They, like I say, every one of our applications has a survey as part of it.
Well, from what I saw and what they stated on the record, they don't understand. So one of the commissioners said, well, the sidewalks are on private property. So he didn't understand that they were on public property. Another one said that in front of her residence on Marin, that sidewalk is definitely on her property. And there are no sidewalks in Marin that are on private property. So it may be.
We're not going to solve
That's an entirely different issue.
We're not going to solve this
nomenclature.
Would there be another wording that might take both these standpoints into consideration? Could we say, provide a public forum and make recommendations to the City Council on the following transportation improvements in Albany?
Sure. I like that.
That help you?
That would help me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anything else?
I think that's my list. Thanks for your forbearance.
Anyone else have comments or recommendations? Do we need a motion for this, staff?
I think it would be appropriate for you to make a motion since this is going to council.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd be happy to make a motion that we recommend the final Traffic and Safety Commission work plan for fiscal years 2019-20 and 2020-21 to City Council with the comments that we have made thus far. And I can enumerate those if you want. I trust your notes better than my own.
If time permits, if the scheduling of the presentation of the work plan is pushed off into, which probably will be in May or June, we'll just put this as maybe a consent calendar item for your next meeting, so you can just double check the final words.
That'd be great.
And that
Great
way.
idea.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, is there a second for that motion?
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Seeing none, item passes, or recommendation moves forward. All right, item 5.4, higher visibility crosswalk design standard.
Oh, yeah, that. Find my notes on that. So, yeah, I think as I mentioned in the Solano Avenue Complete Street discussion, the toolkit for improving walkability in Alameda County states the 444 crosswalk is considered a best practice for its low maintenance costs and high visibility for drivers and sight limited pedestrians.
Is there a presentation from staff?
Sorry. I'm jumping the gun.
Somebody else's turn, Preston.
Sorry.
So staff would like to establish a default higher visibility crosswalk pattern for the city. Direction on recent projects has been to use Continental. Prior to that, the city was using the ladder design. There's also been expressed interest in considering 444. Staff is seeking a recommendation to City Council on which treatment to establish as the default. The shift, I think, several years ago to Continental was to take advantage of the fact that that design allows for better durability, because you can design it to match with the tire tracks and avoid some of the wear and tear, as well as providing bicycle traffic a smooth path through the crosswalk. 444 has been starting to be utilized in more locations because it provides a clear path of travel in the middle and can channelize pedestrians into the center. 444 is the sort of double continental pattern on the bottom right, continental at the bottom left, and ladder that we also see around the city at the top right.
Okay. Questions from the commission?
Is there any difference in cost between all these designs?
No.
No. And then a general question, yellow versus white, what is the,
School.
I think that's a school route.
oh, it's a school route.
Those are yellow, and then the white are non-school route.
Because I've seen yellow in places that I wouldn't have guessed was close enough to a school to be considered part of a school route, but. And then one final question. So if there was a new crosswalk installed and you had a stop sign, would you still have the line for the stop sign? Or I know sometimes you have a crosswalk that's sort of combined. How would that?
You can still have a stop bar, I believe,
Yes.
in advance of the crosswalk.
Okay.
There is generally the recommendations for when you do enhanced visibility crosswalks, you have usually, so that you default to using them more often in mid-block crossings when you have higher pedestrian volumes at a stop sign or signal-controlled intersections. You can also upgrade to that. So you do have some situations where you have a stop sign that you might want to bar in advance of the crosswalk.
Okay. Any other questions? Open up for comments. Who wants to begin? Ken?
We have some of the 444. There are only 2 bars in a line, but
Double continental. I've seen that used somewhere.
they're in the right-of-way, right? So we have a number of these around town that connect bike path segments, and we have bike symbols in them. Do we want to include that specified design in the standard to help perpetuate it?
So we already have that design for where the greenway comes through. I think for the standard, I would say no. We can still utilize all the approved patterns if for a specific project a different design is merited. Okay. So for the case where bicycle mixed-use path is crossing, we might still go to the design that's being used for the greenway.
Okay, so it's not meant to be exhaustive, just specific.
Great, that's correct.
Other questions?
I do have one comment. I like the 444 design. One of the things in converting from ladder-style crosswalk to a 444, if you're doing pavement marking, refreshing, you end up grinding out a lot. The alternative is just paint the new markings on top of the old markings and let the old part fade out. Nothing really wrong with that. Saves on scarring your pavement unnecessarily.
And it's going to come back when the blacking wears out anyway.
Yeah. So I mean, it
Makes sense.
our first thought was, oh yeah, let's grind out all those extra lines and just put down the new stuff. And then I'm like, wow, this looks awful. And the complaints about the dust it generated, and it took a lot of effort to do it. And then we switched to just paint the new markings on top of the old markings, and the old ones will gradually fade out anyway. I was like, oh, that works out fine. No one complained, so could save us a little bit of cost and trouble. But otherwise, I think it's a pretty good standard.
So I will move that the 444 be the standard adopted by the city.
I'll second that.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Let's vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Seeing anyone opposed? Seeing none. let's move.
Just real quick, in pulling
Yes.
up these images, I did come across a three-dimensional.
Oh, yeah. This has always been,
This was not presented. I think you should this one.
That's a special,
that's great.
special case. We can still do that.
I made sure to wait until after.
Oh, my gosh.
I want the Back to the Future crosswalk.
It's like those painted potholes. Right?
Yeah.
That's from the
Wow.
other side, so it actually is just a.
Yeah, that's cool.
That would freak you out.
Yeah.
Fun watching people walk across those.
No, I mean,
Is there any data on how effective those are?
There was like a whole article about this thing, I remember. I can't remember what they said.
Were they effective?
Freaks people out, slows you down, I'm sure.
Because people were like,
Yeah.
what is this?
Holy cow.
The first time they're effective. After
Yeah, you can't
what I'm
fool me,
thinking.
fool me twice. Okay. Item 5.5 is an update on the Cordonices Creek design.
Thank you. Yes, we wanted to bring this back in response to one of the main comments for the previous design presented at Traffic and Safety was the challenge with the sharp 90-degree turns. So the challenge here is for the stretch we're constructing east of 8th Street, the path is north of the creek, west of 8th Street, it's on the south, and we have to bridge the two at 8th. So the alternative that was presented had these 90-degree turns on the east side. There was request to consider looking at alternatives to help address the concern about cyclists safely navigating these turns. So we went through, looked at the site. We had both our on-call transportation engineers and the consultants take a look at several alternatives, including a north side crossing and angled at-grade crossing. We evaluated, as was discussed in the analysis, sort of the pros and cons of those. There were, for the at-grade, more straight connection between the two. Angled crossings generally more limited visibility for folks on the path and for the drivers, for those different approaches, having to look sharper angles to safely navigate for both. So while you would avoid sharp turns as a cyclist, you would have more potential conflict issues in the roadway. And that's the main reason we are recommending against that alternative. For the north crossing, there's a combination of issues that come up with that. This ends up being located right about where the drainage inlets are, so it has drainage and safety and weather events implications and cost implications. The other main issue is if you're going to avoid just moving the 90-degree turns to the west side, you're going to be going into the area that's currently was constructed by a previous grant cycle. That's a relatively well-utilized amenity seating area on the west side. So there is sort of a cut-through crushed granite path that cuts diagonally through that is adjacent to some of the seating. We looked at sort of a more marginal version of just taking part of that and would take out some of the seating, or more dramatic reduction in the turns, but taking out more of the seating area. But both of those, you still are going to have impacts on that west side. You're still going to have the drainage issues, and those were, I think, the main considerations there. To avoid that, you're coming back to pretty sharp turns just on the west side. What we did end up looking at, so I sat down with a planner from Berkeley, because if it's south of the creek, it's going to be Berkeley's approval. One suggestion that came out of that conversation and how to ameliorate the sharp turns was a further reduction in the travel lanes here. So the current design that's shown here is 24 feet clearance between the curbs. Can we go down to 22 feet, still 11 feet travel lanes? get a couple feet extra width for that east side sidewalk. We did look at how much we could increase the radius of the turn on the north end without getting too close to more substantial retaining wall issues and encroaching on the creek. I actually have a sketch. We haven't done design work yet on any of the alternatives, but the consultant did sketch out a little bit what this would look at like, which might help visualize. So rounding the curve as it approaches the 8th Street sidewalk.
Could you zoom in a little on the area we're talking about? Maybe not. Okay. Great.
So softening this turn, they said to about a 15-foot radius. It would have to, I think, do a little more design work to get more specific, but they did take a look closer at how far they could try to push this without having huge escalation in costs or creek impacts. Here showing the expansion from the earlier drawing, a couple extra feet, leaving 22 feet for the travel lanes. And then the other additions that we're recommending for this alternative to address the concern is a wider speed table crossing and moving the rain garden planter a little bit south just to clear the approaches for the cyclists navigating this. So again, we haven't done design work on this. This is just a sketch of these different tweaks and how it could look. But we wanted to bring this back before we move forward with additional design, but this is the direction that staff is recommending.
Questions?
Thoughts?
Just one quick question. The continuation of the bike path past the crosswalk onto, towards the west side, it would be straight ahead across the crosswalk, correct?
And that's existing, yeah.
Okay. All right. Comments?
So I think increasing the radius on the northern turn is great.
Ooh, if I can pause you really quick,
yeah.
Can I get a motion to extend time, say 15 minutes? If
I move to extend 15 minutes.
Second.
all right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None? All right. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, that's great. Definitely support that. I wonder, so was there a rain garden on the east side? Because I don't remember seeing it in the plan that was actually where the drain is. You're talking about moving the rain garden south, but in the drawing I'm looking at, which is the 75% from before, I guess there was a rain. Oh, I see. So that's always where the rain garden was. So it's not designed like the one on the west side. I guess what I'm getting at is if you go back to the sketch, so there's 2 feet between the edge of the sidewalk and the guardrail that's going to be built that is not paved, and I'm curious why. Yeah, right. Yeah, right there. Yeah. I mean, you could
In
get.
addition to the 12 feet width, you're talking?
Well, no, I'm saying you could potentially get 2 feet there without having to narrow the street. I mean, the street's it's a bus route, so.
Yeah, so up where the guardrail is, that I don't think there's as much constraint. Down where you would want it for where it's approaching the crosswalk, there's a utility pole existing. So it widens out after that pole to the south here.
I see.
But it's avoiding relocating a utility pole.
Okay. All right. Yeah, the
Utility pole in the creek.
so that the truncated dome mats, those are, I mean, I haven't seen data, but we've gotten a lot of anecdotal information from strollers and rollers members who say that they crash on those things when they're wet. Some even crash on them when they're dry. And having that one where somebody has to turn in particular is, I mean, that's when the crashes usually occur, like people who take the Buchanan path and they turn south onto Jackson, so they're turning across the mat there. It's very hazardous. So I would like to, I mean, that's something to come up in the standards conversation later, but for this project, I would like to specify that it's a high friction mat. There is a product that several have observed is used in downtown San Francisco, that, I mean, not San Francisco, San Diego, that meets the geometric requirements of a truncated dome mat, but actually has a much higher friction surface. So that's, particularly given the geometry here, I think something that's critical to have in this location. Another feature is that there may be, or there likely would be, University Village residents who would like to come down this path and exit going north on Jackson. And so I asked the commission's consideration of putting some kind of a curb cut or a ramp there so they can do that, so they don't have to turn south and then make a U-turn and go back north again.
There has been some discussion of that. One of the other, what people do currently that would continue to be an option is utilizing the parking lot area, and there is a curb ramp part of the design here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my preference would be to keep people on the path as much as possible, given that we're spending money to build it, and worldwide experience shows that the more you make paths available, the more people choose to ride.
I think we'd probably want to indicate that it would be we wouldn't want to imply that's the route for a pedestrian to take.
Right. I mean, you might, a way to do this might be to add a radius on the north end of the path there. So cut off the apex of that green triangle by a little, not much, and then have the curb ramp start up there so that people are making a right. It's clear, like, this is not the pedestrian route. I mean, if you take this ramp, you're going out in the middle of the street. So it's clearly for people who are headed northbound. I think you can see that thanks, yeah.
If you put the ramp here, you're going to need to cut 6 feet back to ramp down. And that's going to take away half the path width, versus if you basically make the ramp go this way to come down to the street. I agree with Preston, that's going to give us better use of space.
And I think it also solves the problem staff just raised of people thinking, it's very clearly going to be northern oriented.
Not a ped ramp, it's just leading straight north.
Yeah, I mean, it could be like the one on at the end of the cycle track on San Pablo, similar to that, where it's actually parallel to the street and it just drops down to the street right there.
Yeah.
You are going to have a sharp turning radius for for that, and if someone's accessing it from the south, they're going to be cutting across.
If somebody, I
A
understand
southbound person,
if a southbound
it's going to be crossing.
Come up onto it there.
right.
As long as there's not vegetation creating sight distance issues, that's probably fine.
It's a left turn.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a double yellow center line, so
Yeah.
it would be a legal move as long as they make it legally.
So that's intended for people who are on the path for a short amount of time to get between the San Pablo area and this area.
Yeah.
And people who normally ride on the street.
Well,
Yeah.
it's to get maybe more people riding who don't ride on the street, but would be comfortable, because very close to here is the path system for University Village. So they would only have to ride on the road for like less than a block to connect from that path system to this path. And then they'd only have to ride Dartmouth to get to the Albany Greenway. So basically the idea is to create a new route to UC Berkeley that's, more comfortable.
So that would be an alternative to coming down on the path, using the crosswalk and staying on the sidewalk on the west side.
Well, yeah, because the sidewalk, it's not legal to ride on the sidewalk. It's not a bike path. Also, it's a lot of turning. I mean, you're going south, making a U-turn, coming back.
So is there a
north.
distinction between the path system as trails in UC Village as opposed to sidewalks?
Well, I would say at least functionally, they're much wider. I don't know legally. Unfortunately, Brian
just
Parsley's
how they're
not here
used.
because he could answer that. But in terms of how they use it, yeah, I don't know. I just know geometrically the path system would work much better for cycling than the sidewalks would. How they're actually used, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just trying to
Yeah,
look at all the
sure.
pieces. I'm not trying to negate what you're saying. I'm just trying to explore it.
Yeah, I think with the ramp to the north parallel to the street, well, I guess if people are going to make a left turn into it, then that raises the question, is it parallel to the street or I don't know what the geometry is. As far as this junction with the existing path, it could have if it has a retaining curb, it could have a curved retaining curb as opposed to just coming to a sharp 90-degree angle with the path.
This is for people coming from the top of the screen, making a
Yeah.
turn into it.
Yeah.
There are a couple trees.
Yeah, so you can see the tree right there, that one right there. But I'm looking at the grading plan. See that 29-foot line? Whoop. Like was shown on that image.
What's the sheet number?
So you can see that, well, no, I'm just looking, you can see the grading contour right there. That heavy black line is a 29-foot. So you wouldn't need, you wouldn't need to do a lot of, we're not talking about a lot of additional grading. It's already flat, essentially, or at least on the same elevation as the path.
This is the existing curb line, I believe, so.
Right, so it's already part of the flat street.
Just about leave the curb where it is now and just put a ramp next to it.
Yeah.
Other comments, Preston?
I think that's what I had. I really appreciate you
Just
taking.
one caveat I forgot to mention, this is a raised speed table in the city of Berkeley. This design would not be the standard, which Berkeley lowers, has a different design for their standard, but it is similar to one that was done with a private development at Parker and Shattuck, as I understand it. So it still would require approval of the city to do, for this design. The option, if we didn't get that approval and the raised speed crossing that is the standard is a little less ideal for cyclists, could be an at-grade crossing here, which we also sketched out, but is not our preferred alternative, but we still need design approval.
So it's not 6 inches in height. There's a crosswalk coming down to it, and it's being raised, so it's 3 inches and.
Well, speed table's supposed to be 3 inches tall. Usually there's a crown to the street, so while it might be 6 inches at the curb, by the time you get to the middle of the street, it's less.
Got it. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So where's the 3 inches measured for the top of the crown?
From the regular pavement grade to the top of the speed table. So we have some speed tables that kind of match the crown of the street. If we want it to be a raised crosswalk, we tend to flatten it out a little bit more so that it is about 3 inches at the center line of the street, and as you get out towards the curb, it starts to, relative to the street, have a greater height. But I don't see a big issue with being able to get that approved in Berkeley.
Okay.
What is the 3 inches is an issue? Is that AC's?
3 inches, I think, is what we recommend for our raised crosswalks.
But I think that could be mostly managed here. The problem is we have such a narrow roadway
Yeah.
that that's going to make it challenging. We might have to drop the curb height approaching the crossing to get to the right height. But if we're going to be rebuilding the curb there anyway, that doesn't seem like a big deal.
So Preston's suggestion of taking the 2 feet on the inside of the path as opposed to the street side.
Well, so that's he pointed out the power pole,
Yeah.
utility pole, so you don't really,
I mean, 22 is acceptable. I think most transit agencies, for two-way traffic, they prefer 24 when you have, vehicles coming up against each other. But I think 22 is, we definitely do worse.
Really? Wow.
In Berkeley, yeah, you go up to the hills. It's bad.
Yeah, the AC driver who drives that route is amazing.
Yeah.
It's so skilled, at least times I've ridden it.
It's a very senior operated assigned route.
Yeah, they were amazing.
Thank you. I have an ADA question. Back to the truncated domes. I guess I don't know what the rule is for how wide to make those. Is the intent to show somebody that they can sense the actual width
Yes.
of the crossing? Okay, and that's a requirement?
Anywhere that they can enter the crosswalk at grade, there has to be a truncated dome across that entire stretch. If there's a curb, they know that that's the edge of the walkway. There can't be a gap where on a level you can walk off of what functions as a sidewalk into what functions as a street.
Because it's confusing.
Well, you might not know that you've just entered a vehicular area.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it basically has to function as a barrier of sorts between the pedestrian realm and the vehicular realm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so on this one, you're not looking for any, you're just looking for feedback from staff. Those are the comments from the commission. Can I get another motion to extend time?
5 minutes, move to extend 5 minutes.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None?
Thank you for working on that so hard and looking at all the different alternatives.
Yep. Appreciate it.
This looks much
And to
better.
Berkeley for having some adjustability.
Easy.
Okay. Item 6 is announcements. 6.1 is the ACTC workshop.
I'd encourage you to attend. It's going to be, I think, the ACTC is working on a quarter-wide study of San Pablo Avenue, and there's been some initial outreach, a little bit about initial outreach, but I think this Albany meeting is the first kind of formal presentation to a city along the corridor. And it'll be in kind of a workshop mode. There'll be a relatively brief presentation about 6:30, but for the most part, it's kind of open house, staffed by ACTC staff people and consultants. And I think this is a really interesting transportation urban design puzzle with some tough choices will probably need to be made. So I encourage you to participate.
And this isn't specific to Albany, right? It's the entire corridor, or the entire study of ACTC?
The study is for the entire
Yeah.
corridor, that's right. They'll obviously be focusing on what's going on here. But I suspect that they'll be able to demonstrate what they're doing for the whole corridor as well.
Okay. Because I think there's also an Oakland-Emeryville meeting maybe the following week, I believe.
Yeah, they've scheduled Oakland, Emeryville, and they intend to schedule others as well.
Okay.
Those were the, I think, first two to schedule.
Okay. I don't know how many commissioners are planning to attend. We all did the Brown Act training. I guess we just can't share ideas with each other.
This is a public meeting, so you all can be there. You just shouldn't talk among yourselves about what you're seeing.
That's correct.
We can agendize this for a discussion.
Yeah, that would be good.
Thank you for the reminder.
I won't be available, unfortunately. I can't make it that night, but. Okay. Item 7 is future agenda items.
So I would put in a plug for recommendations on standards adjustments to come sooner rather than later. You know, I don't know what's queued up on staff side for the next meeting, but to the extent projects are being designed and planned, I think, given some changes I have in mind could affect those projects. It'd be better to get them in sooner rather than later. The Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission has been working on a street tree policy, which has a nexus with sidewalks. And thinking about the damage criteria that was in that last time it was presented, I think that's something that this body should look at. I think there's a better way to define the damage criteria than is in there currently. Currently, it says if the tree uplifts the sidewalk 2 inches over 10 years, it's kind of like, well, that's sort of a disaster because that means it's impassable for most of those 10 years. So I think there's a way to go down the middle between those two, so I'd like to see that come before this body. And I think the review, the post-project review, the monitoring of the hawk signal should come sooner rather than later because we're going into the spring. If there's any chance to make adjustments that could be helpful to kids who are trying to go to the Little League fields and whatnot, doing that sooner rather than later would be better. So those are my three items for next time. But again, that's subject to whatever else large items are coming from staff. I have no idea what's on your plate for this body, so.
Anyone else with agenda items? Okay. Item 8 is next meeting is April 25th, 7 p.m. Nothing from staff on that. And then item 9, Commissioner McCroskey requested that we adjourn in memory of the pedestrian that was struck and killed at Jackson and Solano. And we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.